Our next award is named for family members of Les Turner and two of the founders of the Les Turner ALS Foundation who remain active on the board of directors today. The chair emeritus, Harvey Gaffen, and his wife, Bonny. Harvey and Bonny, would you please stand and get the recognition you so well deserve? Just look what all you've helped create. Our next speaker represents the 5th District of Illinois in the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm going to go off script for a moment because I need to tell you something. On January 6th, 2020, you remember what happened at the U.S. Capitol. This is not a political speech. And we were on the air covering the events and wanted a voice inside the Capitol. Good luck reaching somebody inside the Capitol that day. But I thought, I'm going to call Mike Quigley's cell phone. And I did. He told me later he did not accept phone calls from his wife, his family, other networks, but he saw it was me and WGN and he took the call. And he stayed with us on air before we knew what was going to transpire. The gunshot, the whole thing, he stayed with us on air and stayed with us till the end, live coverage. That conversation turned out to be the only live, on-the-spot coverage that happened that day from inside the Capitol with a member of Congress, and that conversation is now housed within the Library of Congress. I just want to let you know that I appreciate Congressman Mike Quigley. But that's not why he's here tonight. In 2020, Mike introduced the Act for ALS to create a new pathway to deliver treatment for neurodegenerative diseases. The bill received overwhelming bipartisan support, was signed into law by President Biden in December 2021. To present the Harvey and Bonny Gaffen Advancements in ALS Award, please welcome Congressman Mike Quigley.
Thanks, Paul. Hey, for those of us who grew up with WGN and Cubs baseball, Ray Rayner, Bozo Circus, what else were you going to do? Thank you, Paul, and good evening, and thank you for all who are helping deal with this cause. Let me say at the beginning that I think we all recognize the last several years have been tough for people in my business and for our government and for our public. We can be forgiving for being discouraged, even cynical, and disconnecting with the system. If Brian and Sandra are to be thanked for anything beyond what we're talking about tonight, let me tell you, they gave our democracy a much needed shot of adrenaline, of optimism and hope. And for that alone, they deserve our honor and our praise. Because thanks to Brian and Sandra, we have a chance to once and for all end ALS. Not just end ALS, but give people living with the disease access to promising treatments and improve the research infrastructure we need to one day find a cure. In the early days of Brian being diagnosed, they founded I Am ALS. Shortly thereafter, Brian and Sandra came into my office in Washington, D.C. and discussed needing help to navigate a system not designed for a disease like this. It was obvious the urgency was real, and we all had a lot to learn. But who better to teach us and teach all of us the ins and outs of this disease than Brian and Sandra? Let me tell you, this was a powerful lobbying session. When they left the office, I talked with my staff and said, we've got to get this done. And there was silence in the room. and a whistle, because this was going to be a tough one. The fact that it had extraordinary bipartisan support and it had overwhelming support in its final votes should not diminish how much work this took for a lot of people, especially Brian and Sandra. But it wasn't just their political and communication skills that set them apart. It was their determination, their drive, and above all, their unwillingness to take no and even hell no for an answer. And one of the toughest things I watched in my time in D.C., in July 2021, they were scheduled to come to Washington to testify before the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health. They were forced to wait for 8 hours before they could testify. Most people in this situation would have been being forced to wait this long, would have packed up their things and left, but not them. They waited and waited and waited, and when they spoke to Congress to express the dire need the ALS community is in, they bared their soul that hearing in providing the closing argument for their lives. And it worked. After years of relentless advocacy, their testimony finally broke down the doors that had been closed to them. Things began to take shape. By the end of the year, Act for ALS was signed into law by President Biden. Indeed, instead of sitting on the sidelines, they transformed tragedy into purpose. Ultimately, we need policy that is driven by the patient's real-lived experiences. They know the ups and downs. They know the needs of the community better than policymakers, better than researchers and science. I am honored that Brian and Sandra chose me and my staff. Kudos to my staff, Allison and David, to be a vehicle for their vision. None of this would have happened without them. I will look back on my journey with them, on the things we have done and the things we have yet to do, as one of the most transformative projects of my life, and for everyone else in this room. And for all of that, and for the work we continue to do, thank you, and God bless you for this extraordinary effort. Thanks again.
When you're told the world that you believed you were going to live in is no longer there, you have to either curl up into a ball or act.
When a former Obama staffer was diagnosed with ALS, he was given 6 months to live.
And he's using his political chops to try to change the future of the disease.
We found out Brian had ALS the day we came home from the hospital with our second daughter.
After that initial period of shock, the question we asked was, no one's ever beaten this thing, how do we find a way to do it?
They took this extraordinary personal challenge and said, well, we're not going to be victims. We're going to go out and make things happen because that's who they are.
What we're doing here is not that different from a political campaign.
To get to a cure, it's going to take a totally new playbook.
On diseases like ALS, the healthcare system is broken.
There have been huge advances, yet patients can't get access to these treatments.
This is what we aim to do. Build a patient-centric movement that helps bring the people living with this disease out of the shadows and help them lead the fight. If we cure ALS, we have the potential to cure Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, MS, and a litany of other diseases, because they're actually all connected.
Someone told me, you have to meet this guy. He's going to change the world of ALS. And he did.
And there's one of those moments where you look around and think, this could actually work.
So give me tomorrow and we can laugh at yesterday, but I won't pretend there ain't nothing wrong today. And I don't want to close my eyes on the progress that we made, but for every inch there is a mile of mistakes. Yeah, so go on, oh, go on, my baby, go on, oh honey, oh, go on, oh, go on, my baby, go on, all the way.
Brian and Sandra.
Brian likes to show off his smile when he gets to take off the mask. Can you see everybody, Brian? You want to pull back? Yeah, you should just stand in front. There you go. Whew. All right, we're both tearing up. Sorry. Thank you, Congressman Quigley. When we first heard the news of this honor, we actually asked if we could share it with Mike, because few members of Congress have worked harder and smarter on behalf of ALS families over the last several years than Mike. Mike not only sponsored Act for ALS, there you are, we're gonna throw our love at you, but he navigated every single legislative hurdle with incredible persistence and urgency on behalf of this community. And in what qualifies as lightning speed for DC, we turned this bill into law with an army of advocates behind Quigley. As Brian likes to say on social media, we should all be like Mike. Thank you so much, Congressman Quigley, please. We are also so grateful to be here with the other amazing honorees and the amazing teams from Les Turner and Northwestern. This gala was actually one of the very first events that we attended after being diagnosed in 2017, when Brian was 37 years old. We showed up that night, we were dressed to the nines. I think I wore red again. When you know your color, you know your color. And Brian, at the time, could easily walk and talk, and he really only had a little bit of weakness in his left hand. And to the average person, no one could tell he had ALS, but we had a very clear and proactive diagnosis. We sat at a table at this Les Turner Gala with other families who were recently diagnosed. At first, Andrea, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to handle that, but we soon started talking to our table. Maybe it was the couple of glasses of wine I was drinking quickly. Maybe it was the fact that Brian is a 100% extrovert, but we ended up meeting an incredible couple, Brian and Lori Andre, that night from the Chicago area. And Lori is kind of famous if you've heard of her very successful small business, Lori's Shoes. And they are fellow entrepreneurs, and we started talking about the space, the progress being made, and the possibilities that lay ahead. And at that dinner, that first Les Turner dinner, the wheels were set in motion for what and how Brian and I and the new friends we were making could contribute to moving this fight forward. Brian then spent about 7 months flying around the country, surveying the landscape of ALS nonprofits to make sure that whatever it was that we decided to do was additive and not duplicative of existing efforts. In his conversations with physicians, patients, and nonprofits, it illuminated a real need to organize and empower the ALS community as advocates, in particular as legislative advocates, so they could transform the system in ways that could help speed the end of this disease. We gathered people from across the community who believed that they could make a difference in changing the federal funding levels for ALS, changing the speed with which families can access disability benefits, and most importantly, with Congressman Quigley, changing the speed with which families can access promising new therapies that are still in the clinical trial pipeline, because we're on the ALS clock, as Sandy Morris told us. As it turned out, legislative advocacy was kind of what we were good at. Brian and I, met on the 2008 Obama campaign, and we worked in President Obama's White House. And we knew quite a bit about government, and we knew a few people who we thought could help. We came to Andrea at the time, and we told her what we wanted to do and explained how it was complementary to what Les Turner did, and without a moment of hesitation, she agreed wholeheartedly. I just want to take a moment to elevate something really critical here. At that moment, it took real leadership and commitment to furthering progress for a disease as sector as a whole to embrace a couple of nutty kids like us and to say immediately, yes, just tell me how I can help, which is exactly what Andrea said. In just 4 years, these advocates, in partnership with Les Turner and a network of ALS groups, have changed every facet of the system. They have increased federal funding for ALS research by hundreds of millions of dollars from the government. They passed the Social Security Disability Act, which eliminates the waiting period for ALS families to get benefits. And with Congressman Quigley at the helm, they passed a historic piece of legislation that radically changes the speed with which ALS families can get access to new therapies. And we collectively spent years making the case for new treatments, and just a few months ago, as Andrea mentioned, we won our first battle with the first new ALS drug approval in the last 5 years since Radicava, and the third in history, Relyvrio. If you are enjoying the sometimes discomforting taste of Relyvrio and its life-extending benefits, just know that it was not only the incredible leadership and team at that company and clinicians and researchers, but it was also an army of patients and caregivers who fought tooth and nail for FDA to approve that drug. That is not too shabby for a group of people who were told to go home and get their affairs in order. And through every stage of this fight over the last 5.5 years, as we have worked to stay as strong as possible to keep up with the pace of this advocacy, the teams at Les Turner and Northwestern have cared for Brian. They have cared deeply, they have cared tenaciously, and they have cared authentically. And for so many families in the Chicagoland area, they have been a literal lifeline. On a personal note, we want to thank Andrea for everything you've done for us, for your friendship and support on every level. And before I close it out, Brian, I know you wrote this with me, but I want to pause and see if you want to add something you think we left out. Just a few things. No bad dad jokes, okay? On the table outside was a word. Hope. That is everything. For people and families who are living with this disease. I look around this room and I see one thing. Hope. As a patient, I just want to say thank you. You could be anywhere tonight, but you are here. And that and that gives me hope. And two last things. Let's effing do this. And good night, Moon.